Hi all, I'm Dan Smigrod, founder of the We Get Around Network Forum. Today is Thursday, June 22nd, 2023, and you're watching WGAN TV live at 5. We have an awesome show for you today. Matterport plus Apple Vision Pro. Imagine the spatial data possibilities. Our subject matter experts today are Emily Ullman, CEO and Chief Media Officer for Greater San Francisco Bay Area, Hopscotch Interactive, hopscotchinteractive.com. Hey, Emily, thanks for being back on the show.
Thanks, Dan. I'm super excited about this topic. Thank you.
Awesome. And also joining us is Paolo Tassolini. Paolo is the founder and creative technologist for Bellevue, Washington-based Tassolini Productions, tassolini.com. Paolo, thank you too for being back on the show.
Thank you, Dan. Always a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Emily, for context for today's show, tell us about Hopscotch Interactive.
So Hopscotch Interactive is a real estate marketing agency, as you mentioned, based in the Bay Area. And our original tagline was promoting extraordinary spaces through 3D and VR. So we've evolved over the years, but we were founded originally as a Matterport and media services agency or media services company to help companies promote their spaces. And I was an early Matterport user, and over the last few years, we've evolved, but along the journey, really dove deeply into VR and XR and was the president of the VR AR Association San Francisco chapter. I'm still very active. I'm an advisory council member for Augmented World Expo and ambassador for the AREA Awards, which are in Europa Park in Germany every year for XR excellence for entertainment. So it's very much a part of my DNA now. And so, yeah, I consider myself to be a metaverse scholar, if you will.
Spatial First, 2017.
Correct. Yes. And so in 2017, when ARKit was announced, I joined forces with a couple of other co-founders, one co-founder in the geospatial arena, and then another technical co-founder who had built VR experiences. And we launched a mobile interface for spatial computing for commercial real estate. And we ran that company from 2017 until 2020.
And called Spatial First.
Spatial First, that's right.
and sounds timely and topical for us.
That's right.
And Paolo, for context for today's show, tell us about Tassolini Productions.
Sure. So Tassolini Production is a digital creative studio. So we focus on business storytelling using emerging technologies, which in other words means we help companies, organizations tell their stories by creating presentations, interactive presentations, using emerging media, including touchscreen solutions for events, trade shows, lobbies, showrooms. We also do Matterport scans. We have been an MSP since 2015. And we also have been doing a lot of experimentation and some projects on AR, VR, and most recently also AI, just because it all comes together nicely here.
And doing a lot of mashups of Matterport with AR, VR, XR, MR, whatever letters there are.
That's
Tassolini Productions have been doing mashups.
Yeah, the word mashup, the definition is really how can we put together multiple technologies in a creative way, so we can create new value, or maybe there is zero value. We don't know, but unless you try and we put A plus B and maybe plus C, then we don't know what can come out. So mashups are one of our specialties, and we love also to share the end results with the community. So we have been doing it on WGAN, We Get Around Network, on the Facebook Matterport groups and YouTube and so on.
Yes, thank you for sharing your Matterport mashups with the We Get Around Network Forum community. Speaking of mashups, what happens when you mash up Matterport plus Apple Vision Pro? Your thoughts?
You want to go first, Emily? Because I can start, and then we can tag along.
Paolo, why don't you
Gosh.
go first?
Yeah, why don't you go first, Paolo?
So it's a good question. So I haven't tried the device yet, but I can only imagine the possibility here. It's almost like a prompt to Paolo AI, imagine the possibility. So there are multiple ways that I can think about Matterport. So do you want to capture data, or do you want to consume the data? The processing it happens in the middle, so it's less important, in my opinion. But when it comes to capturing, I'm thinking one day, and I don't think it's too far away from the date of the release of the Vision Pro, that you will be able to get your Vision Pro, walk around the room, and use that LiDAR that is, those sensors, and scan that room. And I bet that apps like Polycam, and they are already salivating with the idea, I can port my app into the goggles, and it will just work with very few modifications. What do you think, Emily? Doesn't think like it's
Listen,
natural.
this is why Paolo and I have been friends for so long, and because we are birds of a feather. We are both huge fans, obviously, of the Matterport system and also of Polycam, which was my favorite app that I was playing with in 2022, hands down. So if people haven't used that before, Polycam uses your mobile LiDAR on your device and helps you scan objects and spaces. You can scan a room, you can make floor plans, and it sort of, is a very elegant way of capturing space. And we've always said in the VR community, and I think that Paolo is one of the leaders in this because he really treats this like a community, which was one of the things that attracted me to the VR space, was that it was a group of like-minded thinkers and people that wanted to experiment, and the joy that brought us meant we were happy to share what we were doing with other people. It's about learning, because we all knew there was no business case that would sustain the whole industry yet. And
So Paolo's proposed that Matterport capture with the Apple Vision Pro might be a reality. Apple came out with the Vision OS SDK just yesterday. Do you think Matterport is already on it in terms of capture with Matterport plus Apple Vision Pro plus?
Jumping in, Emily, I have an opinion there.
I think it's true. The reason why, though, and you have to understand, is that if you look back at all other previous headsets, they were scanning the geometry, and they have LiDAR, but they're not combining photography and LiDAR, right? So that's the difference, is that the Apple Vision Pro is a camera plus the, object recognition or scanning ability, LiDAR ability, and then the M2 processing chip. It has everything under the hood that it needs to be able to create a Matterport scan, and that's new. That's new for a headset. And so, yes, I agree with Paolo 100%.
Do you think that's going to happen? Matterport is going to release Matterport capture via the Apple Vision Pro?
Well,
I don't know why they wouldn't.
So I'm not sure if it would make sense personally to release it. They can easily do it, but imagine you scanning a 360 by doing this 100 times in a house. I don't think it's practical, and it doesn't. So technically, it's feasible. Is it practical? I don't know.
But let's go on to things that might be practical. I like to think of practical as things that make money, save time. In the category of make money, what might be some of the use cases of Matterport plus Apple Vision Pro? Emily?
Probably Matterport. You have to think of Matterport evolving into a wayfinding and augmented reality platform more than the current version of Matterport, which is really about the dollhouse and tours. And you have to look back at maybe even the timeline that you and I discussed before, where Matterport switched to a digital twin company, which is after people get excited about spatial computing again, all of a sudden digital twin, I promise you, will be the next Live at 5 we're going to want to do, because everybody's going to want to talk about digital twins. So yes, annotating spaces with information, and Matterport having a lot of third-party developers that are doing that, and also Matterport bringing that into its native software. I think that's where you're going to see it more than like what Paolo says, doing 360s in a headset. Not as interesting as wayfinding, labeling, documenting, all of these other kinds of things Matterport is also good for, but will be optimized on a headset.
Emily, you've done some mashups of augmented reality meets Matterport using a smartphone and a Matterport partners tech. Would the Apple Vision Pro be a better way to experience wayfinding than just using your smartphone?
Well, you mean from a form factor? I think, it's a good question, because right now Apple Vision Pro seems to be built for more stationary experiences, and I don't know that it's going to do as well, for example, moving indoors to outdoors. And that's one of the questions that I have. And again, I'm like Paolo, I haven't tried it yet. But right now, even an iPad, an iPad can work if it has the tracking, or a phone. But I'm not so sure that I'm going to walk around with the Apple Vision Pro the same way I would maybe with the Magic Leap or with a different headset.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned a couple other technologies. I wrote down a list before the show: HTC Vive, Meta Quest, Oculus, Microsoft HoloLens, Magic Leap, Android AR Core, WebXR. Is there anything about the Apple Vision Pro that is different than things that have previously been done?
Paolo, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I think yes, there are differences, and I think everything that has happened before, it helped Apple to come up with the current device. So Magic Leap, that I think, Emily, you might have one right there.
Oh yeah. Oh, shall I demonstrate my Magic Leap for you guys? Okay, here. Let's see.
Yeah,
I'll
here
put
it
on.
is. So Emily
Okay.
has a. I used to have
I'll
one
put it
too.
on. Right, even with my ponytail, it still works. And that was one of the things that, yeah, here we go. So, and remember, battery pack here. So that's the other thing.
Yeah, but I want to say, these things didn't really take off like a rocket ship that perhaps early adopters thought would happen. So is there something different about Matterport plus Apple Vision Pro than maybe some of the preceding VR, AR tech?
Yes, I think the technology has matured. We went through the summers and the winters of VR, so people are more used to these devices, not to the extent that everybody has one necessarily, but people are more accepting. Along the way, like Microsoft came out with HoloLens, the 2 versions of HoloLens, and I don't know if they're going to come out with a 3rd, who knows, but every first version of any new hardware is difficult. You have to figure out how to sell it, the use cases, and so on. At the beginning, HoloLens was they didn't even know how who to sell to. But now we have the army. We have use cases about the remote assistance, remote help, architectural visualization. So those are becoming more enterprise. I believe, and confirm me, Emily, but even Magic Leap is thinking, oh, these devices cost a lot of money. They're difficult to build. let's sell it to the enterprise that they have more money. And because $3,000 or how much it costs now,
3,500 for the, starting at 3,500 for the Apple Vision
for their
Pro.
vision.
I wear glasses, so presumably it would cost me
Right.
more for some Zeiss lenses for
Yes.
the Apple Vision Pro. So I'm trying to understand.
To me, it's an evolution, and then but until you put this headset into the hands of hundreds of thousands of developers, it's hard to figure out all of the different and vertical use cases. In my opinion, when we think about Matterport and Vision Pro, I see a world of visualization that takes to the next level. Imagine, again, it's not about scanning a place. It's about visualizing it. All this data coming in is a digital twin. I can grab the digital twin in front of me. I can call somebody. I can call Dan and Emily and have a FaceTime with them and say, what do you think about this building? Let me rotate it. And then I see you pointing to a live data source, and you click, and then you zoom in from the dollhouse into the actual walkthrough. To me, that's a strong use case.
So let me pause there and then ask you a follow-up on that. So
Yeah.
I'm going to assume, correct me if you think I'm totally wrong, but that every existing Matterport tour should work fine within an Apple Vision Pro, which let's just make that
It
assumption.
does. It already
does.
does. Yeah, it already
Yeah.
would, because it's already
So-
it's possible. Yeah.
It's a browser.
So Paolo, you mentioned two things. Using Apple FaceTime to communicate and collaborate around a space.
Yep.
Do you think that's a significant use case of a mashup of Matterport plus Apple Vision Pro plus FaceTime or some other mechanism for communicating around a space, collaborating and communicating?
Yes, and the reason is if you watch, so when it was announced, I had to watch twice the keynote just to get it to understand it well, and then I went to the developer sessions and started watching the individual sessions. Apple is putting an emphasis on collaboration. They have these frameworks that framework to share things, frameworks to design things, and so on. And now sharing content and visual, staying in the same space and connecting on the same object, for example, I think it's a pretty strong use case. Has it been explored enough? No, because everything is so new, right? So, but it's easy to think how we can have a FaceTime and we can collaborate on a 3D model. The 3D model is doable. By the way, I think yesterday with the SDK, Apple also announced that they are supporting WebXR standards, right? Emily, I think that's what I heard.
Yeah.
Which means that you open Safari and potentially you could have a 3D objects right there, which is pretty cool. And FaceTime, and then you and I, we can all talk about the same object and picking up and moving to a different room. So we don't know what we don't know, but I think the vision is there.
Yeah, there's a couple things, Dan. Also, you asked about what's different. And one of the things that's really different with this design is that the video pass through. So you have to imagine when you have a Quest 2 or, you have one of these headsets on or a VR headset, for example, there's sort of this pass-through camera was a really important step, which enabled us to have I can exit my experience and I can see the world around me. And what's really innovative, and apparently from the reports I've heard, so groundbreaking about the Apple Vision Pro is that the pass-through is the highest fidelity. It's the most lifelike. And so you really are not feeling like you take your headset off and you just left this other experience and then you came back to the real world. So what I like about it is that maybe sort of playing off of what Paolo is discussing on the collaboration is that instead of feeling like you're going to collaborate and you have to enter into a game environment, or you have to enter into this other world in order to do it, the collaboration feels like it's just an extension of your desktop. It feels like it's an extension of our reality, because it's powerful and the pass through is so much better. So, and if you add to that one other thing, well, I can get into it later, but you're using gestures to control the device right now. You're not using a controller. So that would be the question that I would have is, as a user, does Matterport's content lend itself to gesture control? Or do we feel like for the precision of collaboration, we will need some sort of equivalent of a controller or something else? So I have a lot of questions, but I think it's very different than what we've seen so far.
So sorry, Pablo, go ahead.
No. I was just piggyback on what Emily said. So Matterport support will be out of the box using, you open Safari, you open a link, a Matterport link, you will see your model. Now, is this cool enough to purchase a Vision Pro? I don't think so. However, I could see Matterport trying to think, okay, what else can we offer to make it even more immersive?
That's right.
Is it, and we don't know yet what that will be. Is it about the
Well, that's
3D
why
model?
we're asking you. What is it? What might be the possibility of, instead of how to say this? Okay, you take Matterport, you stick it inside of Apple Vision Pro. That doesn't really seem to take advantage of every technology that's now going on in Apple Vision Pro. So, if you have 12 cameras, 5 sensors, 6 microphones, Emily mentioned gestures, tapping, flicking, expanding, voice, tapping up here, control by eye.
Yeah.
What are the possibilities, instead of having these devices on your wrist where you can just tap or look or touch or stretch or shrink? Is there something exciting where Matterport gets mashed up with Apple Vision Pro?
So do you remember when a Matterport supported what was called VR Core or something?
Yeah, VR Core.
It felt more immersive already. And then people already said, oh, this is so cool. However, I can only move, but I cannot have all the, the matter tags and so on. So what else could be done if you can blend the environment in Vision Pro? So what I'm just brainstorming right now, but imagine that with the little wheel, you can switch in between the pass-through and the Matterport. You are in the location, and then you put matter tags on the real space, and now you turn on the matter tags, and then you see the matter tags, but you see the actual room, like here. So I tap the matter tag, and I see magically things happen, but all those matter tags are being authored originally on the Matterport platform, and they perfectly overlap and overlay with the actual environment. To me, that's pretty cool.
Yes, but going back to Emily has done these mashups, and I think, in fact, you have 2, Paulo, of Matterport plus AR plus a smartphone as an example. I'm just wondering, is there something different and unique about the Apple Vision Pro mashed up with Matterport that is a better and I don't want to say viewing experience, because maybe that's not the right thing. It's some interactive experience.
I have an
Emily?
idea. So, I mean, when you look at the current generation of how Matterport has gone from, for example, originally we had to have VR, sort of for the Gear VR, we had to have those spaces basically handcrafted for.
You're going back in time a little bit. So I think
back
it's
in
about
time.
2015, 2016.
Let's go back to 2015,
2015, and Matterport offered VR in Gear VR and Google Cardboard.
Yeah.
And it was I want to say a stereoscopic virtual reality experience, but it could only be done by hand at somebody, and you paid a lot of money to Matterport to
You
go.
paid about $500 a space, and you had the VR showcase, so you still had an app, right? So you had an app, and that was how you accessed it, and then you would put it in your Gear VR, or you put it in, yeah, your Gear VR, and then later we moved from that into like, let's just jump a little bit further forward. We had the VR Core where they got rid of the really nice transitions, and then we were going from Pano to Pano, which is
So
really
just to clarify for our audience, and may not have,
Oh.
the original experience, I would say it literally felt like you were walking through the space,
yeah.
and the next generation was really
Step
felt
back.
like you were moving from bubble to bubble,
Yeah.
and it didn't cost you $500, and it was available, I want to say, immediately.
Yes.
But it wasn't the same experience. I
Right.
know my wife on that first generation, she put the Gear VR on for the first time, got nausea, and said, nope, not going to use this again. And then maybe that second generation was designed to reduce that, but it never went. I don't think of VR going anywhere with Matterport at that time.
It was definitely not a priority to them because they were trying to scale other things, and it was one of the VR winters, if you will. But what they did instead of really supporting that is that they did make a change a couple years ago where they introduced a different code in their links. So if you go on now to copy a link in the Matterport system, you'll see that there is a bit of code that says spatial XR tracking. And when you have spatial XR tracking on your links, then if you have your model on your website right now, today, any browser, and you use the current link and you put the model on there, if I go in and I navigate to your website, you can go to hopscotchinteractive.com now if you want, in a Quest, right? In a Quest 2 or any of these. And today you can view any Matterport space. It will say in your VR headset, in this Quest 2, it will say, do you want to enter in VR? Enter in VR right from the browser. So we already have this. So your question a few minutes ago saying, are people going to be like, this is the thing that's going to put me into, Apple Vision Pro? Probably not, because we already have it and it's not like a big game changer. The difference is that this is a more or less gaming system. This is really about like gaming. It's not about enterprise use as much.
You're talking about the device in your hand rather than the
device in my
Apple Vision
hand.
Pro.
Exactly, the MetaQuest and
So let me just try and ask that question again. So if you were talking about a virtual reality experience, a VR experience meets Matterport, that seems like it fell flat. It fizzled. You called it a winter. Paolo called it a winter. Is there something, how important is it that Apple's come out? It says that this M2 chip plus the R1 chip to make a latency-free viewing experience. The 64 pixels for every pixel of an iPhone, meaning there's 23 million pixels postage stamp size in each eye, or the equivalent of 4K each eye. And I remember when I was using this device with my Samsung phone, it looked like burlap in terms of the screen. It was coarse, and it sounds like Apple's about to come out with a silky smooth viewing experience, as you described it, Emily. And also the fact that you can come in and out of the experience of what I think of being in the real world versus immersed in a virtual world. So are these factors like super important in terms of the potential success of Matterport plus Apple Vision Pro?
It will help a lot. Sorry, go ahead, Paolo. But go ahead.
No, so I'm thinking that in general, for the success of Vision Pro, having a 4K resolution for each eye is very important, because it opens up the possibility to do actual work, to read text, to spend more time on the device and do something meaningful other than just gaming. Gaming, if it's lower resolution, I can bear with it, but I cannot do actual work on a low resolution screen. Now, is it that how will Matterport benefit from the combination of this high res. Well, photography will be better. The tour will look better. However, I'm thinking something else. So Matterport as a company is okay. It's doing it's hosting all of these, the tour and so on, but it's becoming a data company. They just released, what was like a week ago, Genesis.
June
Yeah.
14th, Matterport Genesis, a kind of like Chat GPT for inside of a Matterport tour. Isn't that crazy and exciting? So
Yeah,
is that relevant to our conversation for
I think
Matterport
so.
plus
I
Apple
think
Vision
so.
Pro plus Matterport Genesis generative
AI, yeah, all these keywords. Perfect.
So I mean,
It
just to pause for our viewers, it means you're looking at a house and you type in show me the house without any furniture. Boom, it's clutter free. Type in show me the house with contemporary furniture. Boom, it's filled in. How significant is that in a Matterport plus Apple Vision Pro experience, Paulo?
To me, it is significant because, for example, simple use case. I scan an empty office. I load it into Vision Pro. And then through generative AI, I'm standing in the middle of this office, and I can pre-visualize what that office might look like if we subdivide it in open space or individual rooms. And this is what Emily already did with her app, right?
Yes.
spatial.
Now, is this better than holding up an iPhone or an iPad?
Totally.
It's going to be better, but it's also it's not as universal yet. That's one of its problems, is that the price point is intended right now for developers and for early adopters, and it's going to show you what the future will be. And yeah, I mean, Paolo's right. This is totally relevant. The Genesis, being able to have Matterport combined with AI and to be able to, with a verbal prompt, if you will, pull a model off of a URL, pull it out, grab the model and bring it into wherever you want to be. Like, you can put it around you, or you can hold it and probably rotate it. Paolo and I could be standing around it and looking at it like we already do with other AR experiences.
So let me try a scenario and then have you comment on it. So Emily comes in and she scans a 30,000 square foot empty commercial space.
Yeah.
There's not no drywall, nothing. And the space is available for purchase or lease, whatever it is. Okay. Yeah. Now you've scanned it. And then you've taken your Matterport tour with an Apple Vision Pro, perhaps even now standing back in the space that you were, and say, how many people can you fit in this space? And then all of a sudden, Matterport Genesis starts populating office furniture within the space. So now Paolo calls on FaceTime and says to Emily, hey, I want to show you what this space looks like configured with the most number of tables. And then Emily says something like, show me with more collaborative spaces. And so it reduces the number of tables, it reorganizes the space. Is that important is that Paulo, does that blow you away?
So to me, it's a use case, especially for commercial. Is it like the 50% of use cases? No, it might be the 10%, or I don't know, for commercial.
Sorry, did you say edge use case?
No. I'm just saying, is it like the use case that will make Matterport and Vision Pro sell a lot? Probably not. But for commercial, real estate,
I just add.
I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, because I always think that innovation will always take place at the intersection of Tossolini Productions plus Matterport plus Apple Vision Pro plus a use case that's about making money. So I'm always thinking that's the first use case, is making money. It's sales and marketing. So if a sales and marketing person could lease out that 30,000 square feet faster for more money, you don't need to have a bazillion people look at it. You need to have the right person looking at that space.
I agree.
Who couldn't visualize how that space looks. So is that, Emily, is that
You're
exciting?
killing me, Dan. You're killing me, Dan. Well, I feel like I need to send around the Spatial First pitch deck to everyone and, bring up the slide that we called Place Time. And we built Place Time Oakland, which was basically using the Spatial First app. And we got the grant from Magic Leap to port it to glasses or to the Magic Leap. Because we saw that this was where it would head. And unfortunately, with the pandemic, we didn't quite get the chance to see it all the way to completion. And things have changed. But not the thing that we always said at the beginning of that pitch for Spatial First was that, empty space is painful. There's a lot of empty space right now. There's a lot of people not going back into commercial office space. And it's still just as hard to help people visualize something. But
You're in the Emily, you're in the greater San Francisco Bay Area. I believe the commercial real estate vacancy rate is about 25% today.
That's correct. 25 to 35, 25 to 30. And also particularly heavy in places like our central business district, the downtown financial district. And so we feel it. And I think that this is the thing is like, in the current scenario, getting visualizations quickly and bringing the cost almost to zero in a way, if you're able to use Genesis to give a verbal prompt to revise the vision of a space almost immediately, assuming you have low latency and you have a good, stable, Wi-Fi connection, then you are there in real time, revising and collaborating and visualizing and having a shared experience with people who may not be in the space with you. That's what Placetime, that's what that whole concept was trying to achieve.
How important is it to be standing in that empty space and doing the Matterport plus Apple Vision Pro? Is that part of it? Is having the client take off the Apple Vision Pro at some point, or no, they're looking right through it. They can see the space. There's an overlay of the.
But if they need to, roll into they need to use that button to basically turn it into a VR experience, and they're able to have the the ability to move through the space while they're stationary, like you do in VR now. Mm-hmm. And they don't need to be in the space. So you could either be in the space and see the augmentations, like the these points of interest and these different data points can be in the space, or you could do that remotely. It's much more comfortable, obviously, to not have to leave your house, but if you need to go somewhere to view a space, then you want to be able to impress somebody as much as you can when you're there. So it is important, Dan. It's really important. And I think that owner operators of buildings are even more struggling now to figure out, how do we stand out?
Let me switch the conversation to a related space. You're in that commercial office building. In some places, a mechanical, electrical, and plumbing space, an MEP space. And I imagine that there's a lot of training that needs to take place around this space. We talked a little bit about making money, but I think saving money, saving time, I'm going to guess training is a big category for that. Paulo, I see you're nodding your head. What do you want to talk about on this topic?
I was going to actually bring this up, that real estate might be one of the scenarios, but imagine if you are an industrial setting. You need to control in real time certain values, and those values are not there. There is no display there, but the display is virtual. So you put it on, and suddenly through Internet of Things, you can see green, yellow, red things that need your attention. Sure. Remote assistance is the other use case that the HoloLens jumped on, because there is money to be saved, right? The technicians goes into this control room, they find something that is broken or is malfunctioning, they need help because they don't know exactly how to repair it. They call home, and here is in FaceTime, somebody is helping the technician figuring things out. Training could be another scenario, like a simulation.
Which leverages what you talked about earlier in terms of communication and collaboration. Meets
Totally.
Training, meets Matterport, meets Apple Vision Pro, meets some overlay of IoT and AR.
Exactly. So whatever I see in whatever the user sees, it can be seen by somebody else, an engineer at the headquarters.
So I still want to ask the question, though. It just begs the question. I listed out all these devices that exist today that sound like exactly what we're talking about. So what's different about the Apple Vision Pro versus all the VR, AR headsets that exist today?
So to me, the field of vision, I think it's important. Right now with HoloLens, it was HoloLens 1, it was this big. HoloLens 2 is this big. I think it's the same for Magic Leap. Now we are seeing, we are seeing a lot. We feel we are there, and I think that makes a difference. And whatever is the graphic, the 3D model that comes out, it's very high resolution. It feels like real, and then it stays there. It's locked because all of these sensors that understanding where this object is positioned, and it doesn't move. It doesn't. So to me, that sense of reality adds a lot of value. I don't know, Emily, what do you think?
So I think that I want to look at the use cases. For example, like if we look at the Microsoft HoloLens and we look at which has the advantage and has always had the advantage of having existing relationships with the enterprise. And so it was a natural fit for HoloLens to be something that a salesperson who's already repping Microsoft can go and say to their existing billion-dollar client, hey, let's roll out a test with these HoloLenses, and this works with your Windows, or not Windows 365, but your 365 suite of apps and your suite of services. And remember, Microsoft, I think, has this partnership now with Meta also to bring avatars in. So there's more to come from the other players, but our focus right now is Apple because it's such a big deal. But RealWear has a very rugged device that is made specifically for bringing up information and remote assistance in the field. They have a RealWear 2.0, amazing device. I just demoed it at AWE, and it's really specifically made to be thrown on the ground, or like with a hard hat, worn with a hard hat. Now, my sense of the Apple device is that the use cases that they showed were ones like, somebody sitting on their couch, or somebody in an office space, maybe in an architecture firm, or somewhere where it's not as much of a rugged environment. And the memes I saw day one were like, every Apple Vision Pro person the next day, and it's showing like a cracked screen. Did you guys see that one? So it's like, that's our experience of Apple products, is that, oh my gosh, what if I drop it and the screen breaks? There goes $3,500. And so it's going to need to be less delicate if it's going to be used in those more extreme environments. And you also have to have it has to be rated to be, because it's a hot device, it has a lithium battery, right? It's going to have to be rated to be used in environmentally hazardous areas. So it's not an automatic fit for AEC, or what did you call it, MEP?
Mechanical, electrical, and plumbing.
Yeah, MEP. Is it a natural fit for those environments? And I would say my first guess is no, and that it's going to instead it will rely on the fact that it has the world's largest ecosystem of apps that you use for personal, for photography, for sharing and communication, and maybe collaboration.
Well, but let's bring it back to Matterport, because that's our audience. So, if you're a Matterport service provider, is this something to get excited about because you see this as a new business opportunity with existing clients or potential clients? Let me ask the question differently, Paulo. You work with a lot of very large clients. are you like, are you in stealth mode as soon as we hang up here, working on building out a Matterport plus Apple Vision Pro story for your clients?
So it's a hard question. I don't have a definite answer saying there is a one scenario that will be the use case for everybody. To me, there is going to be a lot of experimentation that will go well. Some other there will be an extreme and useless. So until we create those mashups and we try them out and we figure out, okay, this is not necessary, goes nowhere, I think it's hard to predict what will stick and what will not.
Do you have a corporate client in mind that you're thinking, oh, I have the client, here's
to me, the low-hanging fruit in my business is more like how can we visualize information or make an impact about a story in a spatial setting. If we can bring in Matterport as is, from day one, there is going to be just a virtual tour. We can go to the extreme. We can extract the 3D model, but even if we extract the OBJ, the matter pack, and so on, when we look at in high resolution, with all those defects, it will look worse than what it is on a screen.
Yeah.
So maybe we don't want to go down that path. Maybe the key is using Apple APIs to scan a floor plan, and then suddenly we can mesh it up with Matterport somehow. It's hard to predict the possibilities. From day one, a lot of the iOS apps will be available. Some of them will be relevant, some others will not. Just the fact that it runs.
Me personally, I was just totally disappointed because I don't think looking at Word or Excel or something to bring it into I can't visualize using those apps in this experience.
Then I know, but we don't know what the real clients might want. They might need an Excel spreadsheet on one end that they click a link and they see Matterport on the others, and that's for them is the killer app. For us, we're dreaming about all this 3D.
Expand on that. What might that be? What does that table do in relationship to Matterport, for example?
So imagine having I don't know, I'm just making up right now, but imagine you have a spreadsheet with all sorts of locations, and then you want to see what this location might look like. And you just have a Matterport link. You click it, you get a Safari, and then you start going into immersive mode, and suddenly you're navigating the house, and then you come back into reality, which is your Vision Pro space, and you go back to the spreadsheet. This cannot be done on a screen, on a Mac or on a PC. You have to start, switching devices, and even if you switch devices, you might not have the same experience. So, to me, this is a cool, low-hanging fruit scenario. Is it super cool?
Can I jump in here?
Please.
I want to go back to actually this is part of the thing that is so interesting for me is that we are not going to have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to remember what we already did 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I want to share that Matterport had something called the XR collection, or VR collection. And so basically what it was is, and this was probably me and I don't know, maybe 5 people used it. I have no idea. But Dan, hold up your little cardboard again.
I think Paolo has one too.
Does it have a QR code on the side? Do any of yours have QR codes on the side?
It's been so long since I used it. I just don't even remember.
Paolo's has a QR code on the side. Now, imagine this. Okay, so the thing is that the way we used to do it was we would help the clients. They would order cardboard, they would put a sticker on with a QR code, they would scan it with their phone, and they would pull up a VR collection of spaces that were already preloaded for them to view, right? It was this really slick thing where I would scan all the spaces and then they would go into that collection, and Matterport would help make the VR collection. And I think I had to go through support to get it, but then there was a web URL that I had, and I could fill in the spaces of my Matterport models, and then basically I got one link, and that one link I just made connected to a QR code. So imagine it's basically that same concept applies with the Apple Vision Pro, and you're, instead of having to go through QR codes, scan the link, do this, instead it's a web page that has not what Paolo is suggesting with a list and then the links to the models. It's the models themselves.
And
They're
so
already there.
yes, and how
Visually
important,
organized.
forgive me, how important is it the ability to tap or look or pinch in order to go to that space? Is that interface super important because it just made it transparent or magical to just be able to select one of those 10 spaces you're talking about, Emily?
Sure. I mean, do you want to read it or do you want to just look at it and go into it? And like,
Yeah.
you know, like so it's whatever you do to reduce the friction between the time it takes to get the information and then sort of providing that, if you will, that display of information. So yeah, for sure, it's better. It's faster. It's more intuitive.
And it's
Let me go
convenient, right?
Yeah.
let me go into a little bit of a lightning round here of some of the features. I know we talked about Paolo, you talked about FaceTime and the 3D camera, photos, video. How important are things like we talked about see each other, battery in the pocket? Is the battery in a pocket that gives mobility? Is that important? Not important?
I think it's a necessity, right? If you want to take it someplace and then have power for 2 hours, you need a battery pack. And then the processor is so powerful that it needs a battery. So,
visual search, the ability to look something up visually.
Cannot be underestimated. It's already being used in Google Lens or Google so much.
Can you give us an example, Emily?
Okay, so for example, let's see, I could just reach for anything in something that you don't know.
I'm trying to relate it back to a Matterport tour though. So what is it? It's something that I'm looking at within a Matterport tour.
Sure,
and
take a picture take a snapshot in the Apple Vision Pro of an image and run that through a recognition type of, an engine, those kinds of things where it would recognize all the objects and it would tell you where to buy them. It could give you links to go visit the websites to buy them. That's the thing, is that it becomes fluid with all the rest of e-commerce.
Paolo, why are you shaking your head up and down for visual search?
So I was just visualizing what Emily was saying. So imagine I navigate into a living room. I see a beautiful sofa. Imagine if by looking at it and by tapping, the Google Lens it does the same thing. So it's just a reverse search through an image that is being captured from within Matterport, and suddenly it's populated with all sorts of e-commerce. Pretty powerful.
You're excited about that? Okay.
It's pretty cool.
Where does
not just Matterport, Dan, though. Matterport is one way, but but there's many other ways.
Yes, I just want to try and stay focused.
This could be an add-on, Dan. This could be an add-on to the existing. We probably don't need even to just be looking. It could be an add-on to one of these overlays. You just right-click, you select the image, and suddenly it just goes and does the reverse search.
So you might even just look at it, and it may be that maybe Matterport can figure out to say with a voice command or an eyesight that you just added that ChatGPT-4 functionality to say, what are my other sofa possibilities right here from IKEA?
Let me tell you another thing. So my wife, she's an interior designer, stager, and so on. Imagine
Francesca, yes.
Yeah, Francesca. So imagine if somebody goes into a room, scanned with Matterport, and can consult with in FaceTime with somebody like my wife, who can say, oh, you know what, I think we should rechange the setting of this room, and here is how I suggest to do it. Genesis, because all of these assets are populated through Genesis, they can be moved, right? They're not stuck there. And suddenly the arrangement is being done in real time through FaceTime, right in front of your eyes, and then you feel you are there, and you see this all this furniture moving, and says, "I like it. I see how it looks like."
So that might even create more opportunities for a specialist who doesn't need to travel on site and can only go visit 2 or 3 sites a day. Now is available on demand. And when you're asking Matterport Genesis, this kind of this ChatGPT-4 meets Matterport Space to rearrange the furniture, you say, okay, let me ask a real designer like Francesca Tassolini and say, what do you think? How might we improve on this?
Now, I don't know when Genesis will be released. Do you have an idea?
I want to say Matterport on June 14th, 2023 said, I believe, early 2024.
Okay. So it seems to me almost like we need to be there with generative AI. Let's announce something, but it's a little bit early on.
Okay.
And
My
sure
lightning round's going very slowly here. Let me try this with a different topic. Matterport plus Apple Vision Pro plus Unity. Does that do anything for you, Emily?
Yeah, I mean, you can make it more into a game experience. You can, you could go that direction. I think of Unity as something that enables more game-like play, moving the camera around. I don't know. It could be interesting.
Follow?
Yeah, you can import assets from Matterport, or you can create assets in Unity, and then the two can be blend together and creating some sort of game, like Emily said. Sure.
Yeah.
So Apple spent some time talking about spatial audio, and to accomplish that is doing 3D mapping of the actual room. Any comments on that? Matterport plus Apple Vision Pro plus 3D mapping of a room in real time. Is it an AR overlay?
I'm just making up a scenario here. Imagine if somebody who sells audio equipment, they want to pre-visualize what the room and what the audio might hear like, and what kind of the different effects might have by purchasing different equipment, right? So using the different positioning, visually positioning differently of this speakers and so on, that might be a sale. I don't know. It's essential. I don't know.
Okay.
Cool.
It's cool, sure.
So I believe, Paolo, you mentioned that you watched the live stream of the Apple keynote, let's call it, twice. I watched, I guess I was one of 1 million. I then watched the Apple 10-minute video twice. 51 million people today have watched that. Sounds like there's some interest in Apple Vision Pro. Emily, are you going to buy one day one?
Yeah, I was hoping there would be a pre-order at the end of the keynote, but unfortunately there wasn't. So we have to wait till 2024. But I actually already know people who have one. And so I'm hoping to be able to get a hands-on at some point in the Bay Area. I have the advantage of, having local friends who are already deep in the weeds on it, and we're invited to the WWDC. So, I mean,
these are friends and colleagues that are building third-party apps for the ecosystem.
Correct. And so there are already things that have been available for VR headsets already, and now they'll be building, a port to the Spatial OS. And I think that, or Spatial, yes, the Vision OS.
Vision OS. Are you buying it just as soon as you possibly can, and you're in?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know why I wouldn't. I mean,
is that a learning experience? Do you have something specific that you want to accomplish? You just like, well, of course, this is the future arriving, and you have to be part of it.
Because I think that I'm not thinking about it like a desktop, Dan. I'm thinking about it like a camera. It's not a desktop for me. It's a camera. So it's a new camera, and it's a new way to take photographs, and it's a new way to communicate and to create media. So for me, it's not even if it were all of these things that it is right now, I think of it as the future of photography, and I think that was mentioned. And so for me,
Yes, but we also don't know whether that's taking an 8-second video clip or a minute video clip, or that you can shoot longer than that. But you don't care. It's the next generation of photography. It's not related to Matterport, but you're getting one as soon as it's available.
Yes.
Follow?
Yes, I'll do the same for multiple reasons. One, for research purposes. There is no, if you know that you are in this field, why waiting a year? Knowing that this device will have a lifespan probably at least 2 years, right? I don't think Apple will come up next year with another device. So why not being sooner in the game, learn as much as we can, and experiment and be early on to the market and pitch into potential clients as a service, as an add-on, who knows? So yes, I'll purchase as soon as it's available.
Yeah.
And you can always resell it, right? If it it doesn't go. I bought a bunch of devices. I sold them all. So it's like holding on all the equipment. It doesn't necessarily make sense to me, at least monetarily. But this is new, and we have to be in. It's like something so new that and so important that you don't want to wait the rest of the world to be ahead of you. At least this is I have this sense of urgency to always try something new and experiment and let's share my findings.
Awesome. It's very exciting, because I want to invite you both back as soon as you have it and you've had a chance to play with it and talk more about it's specifically about, I'm going to ask you the question about, Matterport Plus, Apple Vision Pro, and, what's the vision for making money, saving time. Emily, before we say bye, your final thoughts on perhaps Matterport Plus, Apple Vision Pro?
I think that the final thoughts are, I've been in this space since 2015 in VR, but my senior thesis was on cyborgs and the human-machine relationship, and how computers help us and how they may hurt us. And I think we've never been in a more exciting time to be seeing a complete renaissance of media and a renaissance of the way that we think about technology. So for me, Apple completing this, with Safari and with everything being connected, and us being able to have WebXR on multiple, on any device easily in any browser, it completes something in this next generation. And I think that this is that moment. So yeah, I'm excited about it, and I've been a long time fan of XR experiences, and I'm just excited to see what I can make with it.
Awesome. And Paulo, your final thoughts on Matterport Plus, Apple Vision Pro?
I think like Emily said, you just said the word that I was going to use, renaissance, after this VR spike hype winter. I think the technology is there, the opportunities are there. We have a large user base of Matterport photographers. They are eager to try something new, to differentiate themselves. The team, why not jumping into this now that there is this possibility? It's expensive, so I understand if people will want to wait a little bit to see what's going on there. But for people who really believe into spatial computing, I think buying it on day one, it makes total sense. So that's what I'm going to do.
And I can't wait for the future to arrive. Paulo, Emily, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks, Paulo.
We've been visiting with Emily Ullman, CEO and Chief Media Officer of Greater San Francisco Bay Area Hopscotch Interactive, website hopscotchinteractive.com, and the We Get Around Network forum @hopscotch. And Paulo Tassolini, founder and creative technologist for Tassolini Productions in Bellevue, Washington. Website is tossolini.com, and in the We Get Around Network forum at Tossolini. For Paulo and Emily, I'm Dan Smigrod, founder of the We Get Around Network forum, and you've been watching WGAN TV live.